Judge William Harrison's polished leather shoes echoed against the freshly waxed marble floors of the Davidson County Courthouse. The morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows, casting long shadows across the historic building's corridors. At precisely 8:15 a.m., as he had done every weekday for the past 15 years, he straightened his bow tie in the reflection of his chamber's window. "Another busy morning, Your Honor," said Linda Matthews, his secretary of 12 years, as she placed a stack of case files on his mahogany desk. "We have 37 cases today, mostly routine." She paused, adjusting her reading glasses. "Though there is one parking violation that was flagged for immediate attention." Harrison nodded absently, his mind already running through his mental checklist for the day. The weight of his judicial robes settled comfortably on his shoulders as he prepared for another day of maintaining order in his courtroom. At 62, he took pride in running the most efficient courtroom in the county. The morning proceeded like clockwork. A parade of traffic violations, minor disputes, and municipal infractions filed through his courtroom. Harrison handled each case with swift precision, his gavel marking time like a metronome. The courthouse regulars, lawyers, bailiffs, and clerks, moved through their familiar dance of justice. At 10:45 a.m., Officer James Rodriguez took the stand for his regular Tuesday testimony about traffic violations. The young officer's crisp uniform and well-prepared statements always made Harrison's job easier. As Rodriguez finished describing a routine speeding ticket, Linda quietly approached the bench with a yellow sticky note. "Your Honor," she whispered, "the flagged case is next. The defendant called earlier about being delayed due to an emergency." Harrison's lips tightened slightly. He had little patience for excuses, especially regarding simple parking violations. In his experience, everyone had a story, and most were carefully crafted to avoid responsibility. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, letting in a shaft of bright sunlight. Harrison squinted, barely making out the silhouette of a woman hurrying down the center aisle. The click of her heels against the floor broke the courtroom's steady rhythm. "Case number 47,829, announced the clerk. "A parking violation at 421 Main Street in a restricted emergency vehicle zone." Harrison glanced down at the citation, noting the $250 maximum fine. His courtroom had strict rules about parking in emergency zones. They were kept clear for a reason. He looked up, prepared to deliver his standard lecture about public safety and responsibility. The woman now stood before him. Her surgical scrubs slightly wrinkled, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. A hospital ID badge hung from her neck, swaying slightly as she caught her breath. Her presence seemed somehow different from the usual parade of traffic offenders. There was a quiet dignity in her stance, despite her rushed appearance. "Dr. Maya Thompson, Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and professional. "I apologize for my delayed arrival. I was in the middle of—" Harrison raised his hand, cutting off her explanation. He had heard every excuse imaginable over his years on the bench. Emergency or not, rules were rules, and his courtroom ran on precision and respect for the law. Little did he know that this seemingly routine Tuesday morning would become a turning point in his judicial career, challenging everything he thought he knew about justice and judgment. Dr. Maya Thompson stood before the bench, her surgical cap still tucked in her scrubs pocket. The faint scent of medical-grade sanitizer lingered around her, a stark contrast to the musty courthouse air. Her digital watch displayed 10:52 a.m., barely 2 hours since she had completed the emergency surgery that saved young Marcus Wilson's life. "Your Honor, I understand the gravity of parking in an emergency zone," she began again, her voice steady despite her fatigue. "I'm a pediatric cardiac surgeon at Memorial Children's Hospital, and this morning—" Judge Harrison's hand rose again, his signet ring catching the fluorescent light. "Doctor or not, the law applies equally to everyone," he stated, his tone carrying years of unwavering authority. "The sign clearly states no parking, emergency vehicles only." Dr. Thompson took a deep breath, her fingers unconsciously touching the pager at her hip, a habit formed through years of emergency calls. "Sir, I received an urgent call about a 5-year-old patient in critical condition." "Every minute." "The hospital has designated parking areas." Harrison interrupted, shuffling the papers before him. "Your credentials don't grant you special privileges on city streets." The gallery watched in tense silence. Among them, a young law clerk named Sarah Chen scribbled furiously in her notebook, her brow furrowed at the scene unfolding before her. Officer Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably at his post by the door, recognizing Dr. Thompson from his daughter's recent hospital visit. "Your Honor," Dr. Thompson tried once more, her professional composure masking her growing frustration. "I had to perform an emergency aortic repair on a child. Time was critical, and the regular parking structure would have added 7 minutes to." Harrison's gavel struck with practiced precision. "The fine is $250. Dr. Thompson, this court maintains order through consistent application of the law. Your profession, while admirable, does not exempt you from following city ordinances." Linda Matthews, watching from her desk, noticed the subtle tightening of Dr. Thompson's shoulders, the only visible sign of her disappointment. The surgeon reached for her professional leather wallet, the same one that held the business card she'd received last week from Time magazine's editorial team. "I understand, Your Honor," Dr. Thompson replied, her voice carrying the same careful precision she used when explaining complicated procedures to anxious parents. "I'll ensure to factor in parking time during future emergencies, even if those minutes could be decisive." The subtle emphasis on her last words caused Harrison to glance up briefly, but he was already reaching for the next case file. The fine was paid, and justice, in his view, was served. As Dr. Thompson turned to leave, her pager suddenly buzzed. She checked it quickly, her expression shifting from resigned to focused in an instant. Several observers noticed her transformation, from a chastised parking offender to something else entirely, something they couldn't quite define. "Dr. Thompson," called Linda, hurrying after her with a receipt. "You forgot this." The surgeon paused briefly, offering a warm smile that seemed to brighten the austere courthouse corridor. "Thank you," she said, accepting the paper. "I'd love to stay and explain about Marcus's surgery, but I have another young patient waiting. Some things just can't wait for perfect parking arrangements." With that, she strode toward the exit, her quiet dignity leaving an impression on everyone except the judge, who had already called the next case. The heavy courthouse doors swung shut behind her, as she rushed back to the world where her decisions truly were matters of life and death. Judge Harrison settled into his favorite leather armchair, loosening his bow tie after a long day at court. The evening sun cast warm shadows across his study's oak-paneled walls, and the subtle aroma of his evening coffee provided a welcome comfort. His mind still lingered on the day's cases, 97 decisions, each one delivered with his trademark efficiency. "Dad, Dad." Emma's excited voice echoed through the hallway, accompanied by the rapid padding of sock-covered feet. His 17-year-old daughter burst into the study, her school backpack still slung over one shoulder and a glossy magazine clutched to her chest. "What's got you so excited, sweetheart?" Harrison asked, smiling at her enthusiasm. Emma had inherited her mother's boundless energy, and her presence always brightened his evening routine. "You won't believe who's in Time magazine." She perched on his desk, her AP biology textbook sliding out of her backpack. "Remember when I told you I wanted to become a surgeon? Well, look at this." Harrison reached for his reading glasses, prepared to show polite interest in whatever had captured his daughter's imagination this time. Emma had been talking about medical school ever since her volunteering stint at Memorial Children's Hospital last summer. "She's amazing, Dad," Emma continued, carefully opening the magazine to a professionally photographed spread. "Dr. Thompson pioneered this new technique for pediatric heart surgery. She's reduced recovery time by 60%. They're calling her the child heart whisperer." The coffee cup froze halfway to Harrison's lips. There, spanning 2 full pages, was an unmistakable face. Dr. Maya Thompson stood in surgical gear, her expression focused yet compassionate. The same woman he had found just hours ago. She operated on Lily Martinez. Emma said, referring to her classmate's younger sister. Nobody else would attempt the surgery. It was too risky. But Dr. Thompson did it. And now Lily's sister is playing soccer. Harrison's eyes moved to the article's text. Dr. Maya Thompson's revolutionary approach to pediatric cardiac surgery has saved over 300 children previously considered inoperable. Her technique, now adopted by leading hospitals worldwide, has transformed the field of pediatric cardiology. His throat tightened as he continued reading. The article detailed her work in underserved communities, her research breakthroughs, and her dedication to training other surgeons in her innovative methods. The same woman he had dismissed so readily in court had spent the morning saving a child's life before rushing to his courtroom. Did you know she does free surgeries once a month for families who can't afford them? Emma's voice seemed distant now. She could make millions in private practice, but she chooses to work where she can help the most children. Harrison set down his coffee, his hands slightly unsteady. The magazine featured another photo. Dr. Thompson surrounded by smiling children, all former patients. Their grateful parents' testimonials filled the sidebar, each one a story of hope restored. "Dad, are you okay? You look pale." He managed a weak smile for his daughter. "I'm fine, Emma. Just thinking about something that happened in court today." As Emma launched into another story about Dr. Thompson's achievements, Harrison's mind returned to the courtroom. He recalled her composed dignity, her attempted explanation about the emergency, and his own dismissive response. The weight of his signet ring suddenly felt heavy on his finger, a symbol of judicial authority that he had wielded without wisdom. Sleep eluded Judge Harrison that night. His home office became a sanctuary of reflection as the clock ticked past midnight. The Time magazine lay open on his desk, Dr. Thompson's accomplished smile seeming to watch him as he pulled out case file after case file from his briefcase. He clicked on the courthouse's digital archive, his password granting access to years of recorded sessions. The familiar interface displayed hundreds of cases, each one a decision he had made with unwavering certainty. Now that certainty felt like quicksand beneath his feet. "Case number 47,829, he muttered, finding that morning session. The video played on his monitor, and he watched himself through new eyes. His dismissive hand gesture, the interruptions, the swift judgment, all of it appeared different now. Harrison opened his leather-bound notebook, the one Emma had given him last Father's Day with "Justice Serves" all engraved on its cover. His pen moved across the paper as he began documenting patterns in his own behavior. Times when he had cut off explanations, moments when he had made assumptions without full context. The office printer hummed as he gathered statistics from his recent cases. Row after row of data filled the pages. Fine amounts, defendant demographics, speaking time allowed. The numbers began to tell a story he had never intended to write. A text message lit up his phone. "Dad, you should be sleeping. But since you're up, here's a link to Dr. Thompson's TED talk about emergency medical decisions. Love you, Emma." His conscience in teenage form somehow always knew when he needed guidance. The TED talk played on his laptop while he continued his research. Dr. Thompson's voice filled the room, discussing how every second counted in pediatric cardiac emergencies. "Sometimes," she said in the video, "the difference between life and death is measured in minutes, not hours. We make split-second decisions, but they must be informed by both expertise and empathy." Harrison paused the video, the words striking uncomfortably close to home. His own split-second decisions, made in the name of judicial efficiency, suddenly seemed hollow. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number, not caring about the late hour. "Bill? Sorry to wake you." He spoke to his old law school friend, now a judicial review consultant. "Remember our discussion about blind spots in the system? I need your insights on something." The night deepened as Harrison filled yellow legal pads with notes. ideas for procedural changes, thoughts on implementing new listening protocols, ways to ensure every person in his courtroom had a fair chance to be heard. His coffee grew cold, forgotten amid his intensive self-examination. As dawn approached, he found himself looking at a photo on his wall, his swearing-in ceremony 15 years ago. His younger self smiled confidently, hand raised, promising to uphold justice for all. That promise felt different now, weighted with new understanding. Linda's morning text arrived right on schedule. Your Honor, first case at 9 a.m. Light docket today. Harrison looked at his desk, covered in evidence of his sleepless night. Printouts, statistics, case files, and that magazine still open to Dr. Thompson's article. For the first time in 15 years, he texted back, Linda, please clear my morning schedule. There are some changes we need to discuss. The rising sun cast long shadows across his desk, but Judge William Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the humbling yet hopeful sensation of seeing clearly for the first time. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime energy, but Judge Harrison sat alone at his regular corner table, his sandwich untouched. His morning had been spent in his chambers, engaged in one phone call after another. Linda had watched with growing curiosity as her typically routine-driven boss transformed into a man on a mission. Judge Harrison. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Chen, the observant law clerk from yesterday's session, stood beside his table with a folder clutched to her chest. I have those statistical reports you requested. Sit down, Sarah. He gestured to the chair across from him. And thank you for compiling these so quickly. He opened the folder, revealing pages of meticulously organized data about case handling times and decision patterns across different demographics. I noticed something interesting, Sarah ventured, her voice gaining confidence. In cases where we allowed full explanations, the appeal rate dropped by 60%, even when the final decision remained the same. Harrison nodded, remembering his own discoveries from the previous night. His phone buzzed. A response from Justice Maria Rodriguez, a respected colleague known for her groundbreaking work in judicial reform. Looking forward to our 2 p.m. call, the message read, Your Honor. Linda approached their table, tablet in hand. Judge Chen from the Diversity and Inclusion Committee is on line 1, and Dr. William Foster from the Judicial Training Institute sent over the preliminary proposal you requested. Harrison checked his watch. 12:45 p.m. His afternoon was packed with meetings he'd arranged since dawn, each one a step toward the changes he envisioned. The weight of his revelations had transformed into purposeful energy. Sarah, he turned back to the young clerk. How would you like to head up a research project? We need to analyze our courtroom procedures, particularly regarding time allocation and listening protocols. Sarah's eyes lit up. Actually, sir, I wrote my law school thesis on procedural justice and its impact on community trust. I'd be honored to. She stopped, realizing she might be showing too much enthusiasm. Perfect. Harrison smiled, his first genuine smile in days. Draft a proposal. Include everything you think we should examine. Don't hold back. As Sarah hurried away, Harrison's phone buzzed again. This time it was Emma. Dad, just heard from Mrs. Martinez. Lily's sister is being discharged today. Dr. Thompson's new technique really worked. So proud you're looking into making changes at court. Mom would be too. His throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. Catherine had always been his moral compass, gently questioning his certainties. He could almost hear her voice. Better late than never, Will. Linda returned with an updated schedule. The Chief Justice can meet next week to discuss your proposals. And the State Judicial Conference is interested in having you speak about procedural reforms. Harrison gathered his papers, his untouched lunch forgotten. The afternoon ahead would be demanding, but for the first time in years, he felt energized by challenges rather than burdened by them. As he walked back to his chambers, he passed the courtroom from yesterday. Through the window, he could see another judge presiding, mechanically moving through cases with the same efficiency he had once prized above all else. "Linda," he paused, "schedule a meeting with the court administration. It's time we reconsidered our case time allocations. Justice served quickly isn't always justice served well." His secretary smiled knowingly as she made the note. Sometimes, she thought, the most significant changes came from the most unexpected moments, like a brief encounter with a remarkable doctor who never got to finish her explanation. Memorial Children's Hospital sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, its modern glass facade a stark contrast to the courthouse's classical columns. Judge Harrison stood in the lobby, his carefully written letter feeling inadequate in his pocket. The cheerful murals of cartoon animals and smiling suns made his dark suit feel oddly out of place. "Judge Harrison." A nurse approached him. "Dr. Thompson is between surgeries. She'll meet you in the healing garden in 15 minutes, if that works for you." He nodded, following the nurse's directions through corridors filled with life and purpose. Unlike his courthouse's hushed atmosphere, the hospital buzzed with energy. Children in wagons being pulled by nurses, parents offering encouraging smiles, medical staff moving with focused determination. The healing garden was a peaceful oasis amid the hospital's activity. Sunlight filtered through carefully arranged trees, and the gentle splash of a fountain provided a soothing backdrop. Harrison noticed a young patient in a wheelchair, drawing sunshine and flowers while her mother watched proudly. "That's Marina." Dr. Thompson's voice came from behind him. 6 months ago, her heart couldn't pump enough blood for her to hold a crayon. Now she's planning to enter her art in the school fair. Harrison turned to face her. Dr. Thompson wore surgical scrubs under her white coat, her hospital ID catching the sunlight. She looked even more impressive here in her element than she had in the Time magazine photos. "Dr. Thompson, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he began, his prepared speech suddenly feeling formal and stiff. "I owe you an apology." She gestured to a bench near the fountain. "You read the article," she stated simply, not a question. "Yes, but that's not why I'm apologizing." Harrison sat beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I failed in my duty as a judge, not because of who you are or what you've accomplished, but because I didn't take the time to listen. I violated the very principles of justice I swore to uphold." A group of medical students passed by, their excited chatter about a successful procedure floating across the garden. Dr. Thompson watched Marina add another flower to her drawing before responding. "You know, Judge Harrison, in surgery, we have protocols for everything. But sometimes, saving a life means knowing when to break from routine." She turned to face him. "That morning, I had to make a split-second decision. Marcus, the boy I operated on, had only minutes." Harrison pulled out his letter, then tucked it away again. Written words couldn't capture what needed to be said. "I spent 15 years championing efficiency over understanding. Your case, it made me realize how many stories I never heard, how many contexts I ignored." "And now?" she asked, her keen surgeon's eyes studying his face. "Now I'm implementing changes. New protocols for hearing cases, better time allocation, training programs." He paused, watching Marina show her mother another drawing. "But I wanted to apologize to you personally, not just for my judgment that day, but for the attitude it represented." Dr. Thompson's pager beeped. Another patient needed her expertise. She stood, adjusting her white coat. "You know, Judge Harrison, in my field, we have a saying. The best surgeons are the ones who remember there's a person behind every procedure." She smiled warmly. "Perhaps the same is true for judges." As she turned to leave, she added, "I'm giving a talk next week about decision-making in high-pressure situations. Your perspective as a judge could add valuable insight. If you're interested." Harrison stood, feeling the weight of his robes even though he wasn't wearing them. "I'd be honored, Dr. Thompson. And thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that sometimes the most important judgment isn't the one we pass on others, but the one we pass on ourselves." The courthouse auditorium had never been so full. Judges, medical professionals, and legal staff filled every seat, with more people standing along the walls. Dr. Thompson stood at the podium, her presentation slides showing a split screen, a surgical theater on one side, a courtroom on the other. In both our worlds, she explained, gesturing to the images, we make decisions that change lives. The difference is often in the time we have to make them. She clicked to the next slide, showing a cardiac monitor alongside a judge's docket. But whether we have seconds or hours, the impact ripples through families and communities. Judge Harrison watched from his seat in the front row, noticing how his colleagues leaned forward, engaged by the unexpected parallels between their professions. Sarah Chen, now heading the court's research initiative, scribbled notes frantically. Last month, Dr. Thompson continued, I had 90 seconds to decide whether to try a new approach during surgery. Judge Harrison often has less than 5 minutes to evaluate a case that might affect someone's entire future. She paused, letting that sink in. The question isn't whether we must make quick decisions, it's how we can make them both swift and just. Harrison stepped up to join her at the podium, their collaborative presentation moving into its next phase. Dr. Thompson's insights led us to develop new protocols in our courtroom, he explained, sharing the preliminary results from Sarah's research. By implementing medical-inspired checklists and communication strategies, we've reduced appeals by 40% while maintaining efficient proceedings. The audience stirred with interest as they presented their innovative approach, a fusion of medical emergency protocols and judicial procedures. Dr. Thompson described how surgical teams maintained clarity under pressure, while Harrison explained how these principles were being adapted for the courtroom. When a child is in crisis, Dr. Thompson demonstrated with a video, every team member has a voice. The newest resident can call out a concern, and we listen. Lives depend on this open communication. Similarly, Harrison added, we've established new guidelines ensuring every person in our courtroom has a meaningful opportunity to be heard. The results have been remarkable. He shared statistics showing improved satisfaction rates among all participants in the judicial process. During the question and answer session, a young judge raised her hand. But how do you maintain efficiency with these new procedures? Dr. Thompson smiled, sharing a knowing look with Harrison. Yesterday, I performed a complex surgery in record time precisely because my team felt empowered to communicate effectively. Sometimes, slowing down at the right moment helps you move faster overall. After the presentation, as attendees gathered in small discussion groups, Linda approached with an update. Your Honor, 3 other districts have requested information about implementing these protocols, and the Judicial Review Board wants to feature this initiative in their next publication. Harrison watched Dr. Thompson across the room, where she was explaining something to a group of fascinated law clerks. She caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. Their unlikely partnership had sparked something important. You know, Sarah commented, reviewing her notes, when you find Dr. Thompson that day, you actually gave the court system a priceless gift. You showed us how to be better. Harrison touched the new ID card on his label, part of the reformed court identification system inspired by hospital protocols. No, Sarah. Dr. Thompson and that young patient she rushed to save showed us something more valuable. That justice, like healing, requires both expertise and humanity. The afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse windows, illuminating both medical professionals and legal experts engaged in animated discussion. 2 worlds had indeed met, and both were richer for it. Sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows of the courthouse's East Wing, now transformed into the Center for Judicial Innovation. Judge Harrison adjusted his tie as he watched people filing into the ceremonial hall. Today marked 1 year since that fateful parking ticket, and the changes it sparked had exceeded everyone's expectations. Dad, look who's here. Emma, now a pre-med student, pointed toward the entrance where Dr. Thompson was greeting a group of young patients. Marina, the young artist from the hospital garden, walked beside her, no longer needing a wheelchair. She carried a framed drawing, the same sunshine and flowers she'd sketched that day, now chosen as the center's official logo. Sarah Chen, recently promoted to Director of Procedural Innovation, approached with her tablet. "The numbers just came in, Your Honor. The new listening protocols have been adopted by 27 court systems nationwide. Complaint rates are down 65%, and case satisfaction ratings have never been higher." Local news cameras set up their equipment as Linda coordinated with the event staff. The ceremony today would celebrate more than just the center's opening. It would showcase a fundamental shift in how justice was administered. "I hear you're up for the Judicial Excellence Award," Dr. Thompson said, joining Harrison by the podium. Her surgical scrubs were replaced by a professional suit today, though her hospital ID still hung around her neck. She'd just finished morning rounds. "The award's not important," Harrison replied, watching Marina show her artwork to a group of judges. "What matters is that we're making real change. Did you see the latest data from the youth court program you inspired?" Dr. Thompson smiled. "The one where we have medical students and law students collaborating on community cases? Yes, the results are remarkable. Teaching empathy alongside procedure, it's transforming both professions." The ceremony began with a series of testimonials. A young mother described how the new protocols had given her a chance to explain her circumstances. A law student shared how the medical legal partnership program had changed his approach to justice. Officer Rodriguez, now a training coordinator, detailed how the reformed system had improved police-community relations. As Harrison rose to deliver his speech, he caught sight of a familiar magazine cover framed on the wall, Dr. Thompson's time feature that had started it all. Beside it hung a new article, "Justice Reformed: How a Parking Ticket Changed the Court System." 1 year ago, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience, "I made a decision based on routine rather than understanding." Today, we celebrate not just a new building or program, but a new approach to justice itself. He gestured to Dr. Thompson in the front row. "A brilliant surgeon taught me that every case, like every patient, has a story that deserves to be heard. When we take time to listen, we don't just make better decisions, we build better communities." Marina's artwork, now illuminated by the morning sun, cast colorful reflections across the hall. The flowers she'd drawn seemed to dance on the walls, a reminder that growth and healing could spring from unexpected places. As the ceremony concluded, Emma caught her father in a proud embrace. "Mom would have loved this," she whispered. Harrison watched Dr. Thompson demonstrating the new communication protocols to a group of visiting judges, her natural teaching ability evident in their engaged expressions. Linda approached with his afternoon schedule, now thoughtfully balanced with adequate time for each case. "Your Honor," she said, her eyes twinkling, "your next appointment is waiting. It's a parking violation case." Harrison straightened his robes, a slight smile crossing his face. "Then let's make sure we hear the whole story."